Hey everybody, good day. Welcome to another exciting, fun, and scintillating episode of the OIG Roundtable. We're short one of our trusty compadres. Jason Eisengrind is away on much needed PTO, but I've got the rest of the crew here. We're gonna have a great discussion. As always, Wade McFall, retired assistant special agent in charge from our LA field office, and now a member of our SIU always a member of our SIU investigative team. And apparently he's also the internship coordinator. We'll talk about that in a moment. And Matt Kachansky, retired executive from HHS OIG, retired Northeast UPIC director, and now our SIU director here on our investigative team. And I am still Eric Rubenstein, Senior Director of Litigation, Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Support. And we're going to talk about interns, and we're going to talk about bringing people in for internships. We previously kind of talked about mentoring, and on a previous broadcast, we talked about the roles of mentors and the importance of mentoring. And all three of us, and including Jason, mentoring was an important part of our careers. And for those that don't know it, Jason was my field training agent, or my de facto mentor for the first couple of years of my career. And I know that Matt has had some strong feelings on mentoring and interns, and Wade as well. And I was the internship coordinator when I was at the OIG. And interns and the whole prospect of interns is an important piece. It helps to set a really good framework. We've got an intern that's starting in a couple of weeks who actually goes to school in the same geographical area where Wade lives in Wisconsin. And so Wade is going to be mentoring and helping to get the intern some experience in healthcare fraud, waste, and abuse this summer. And so, Wade, I want to start with you, because mentoring, interning, it's all in the same vein. But, when we think about interns, we think about it in some regards as a proving ground or a way for people to get a little bit of experience. And you used a great example, which was, interns at the OIG, or interns in a lot of places, are a semester or a school year. And you called it the 6-month job interview. And interestingly enough, you also spent time as an intern in your past life when you were a youngin as well. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the value of interns in the whether it's the OIG or the SIU. Maybe we break it up a little bit, but there's obviously value in both interns in the SIU space as well as in the OIG space. And talk a little bit about this whole premise of the 6-month interview or 3-month interview or whatever it may be.
So I started out as an intern my second to last semester when I was in college. So it was a 1-semester internship, and I was required to do X amount of hours. I don't know if it was 100 hours or something like that. But I finished that, and in talking to the people that I was working with, I was interested in applying there once I got my degree. And so I decided I looked at it as a 6-month long job interview, both for me to see if it's someplace I wanted to work, and for the agency and the people that I was working with to see if I was a good fit, if I would, pass their interview. So that's the way I looked at it. So when my semester-long internship was up, I stayed on another semester, just like maybe 2 days a week, working, 3 or 4 hours a day, because I had schoolwork to do. But I did approach it that way because while I was working, it was during the George H.W. Bush administration, coming up on the election in '93, and I was kind of told, that I would, if they could find a spot for me, that they were interested in hiring me. But then as January got closer and Clinton got elected, there was the word on the street was that there was going to be a hiring freeze for months. So they brought me on actually right before, a couple days before Clinton took office, as a GS5 clerk typist. And I didn't know how to type, but I was now an official federal employee, and I started looking at Social Security cases and things of that nature. I wasn't a typist, so I wasn't doing that kind of work, but they needed to get me on before a certain date. So that's how I got my foot in the door. And again, looking back at it as a 6-month job interview, both for me and for the agency. So once I got hired, about 2 years later, I brought on my first intern, and over the years, we brought on dozens of interns, and we probably we hired probably around 15 agents who were interns at our office. So a lot of the staff there, over the years came on by way of internships. And many of them are still there. Some of them who were interns for me are now eligible to retire. So makes me feel a little bit old, but that's kind of the approach we had in Los Angeles. But there's a couple of issues that you have to deal with because you can't just there's this competitive announcements that typically have to be put out there for job announcements. So the typical way that we would do it is we get tons of resumes and review them, but we were able to get direct hire authority, whereby if it's an intern, and I don't know the mechanics, Matt probably knows better than I do how we had to do this, but we could kind of sidestep that competitive announcement and bring on people as interns, as agents, if we thought that they kind of prove themselves, they express an interest. We had, I think, better luck a lot of times with bringing on interns as far as having them there for the long haul longevity versus hiring agents from other agencies that transferred over. A lot of times that was just a stepping stone to someplace else they wanted to go. But the interns tended to stay, a lot of them, for their whole career, which was kind of a reason that we in Los Angeles use that as a hiring method quite often. We still had brought on other experienced agents because we couldn't have a whole staff of brand new, green agents. But it was an approach that we used, and I think it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, what you're talking about for interns that come in and then convert over is it's now known as the pathways, right? It's the pathway to the job. And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on government hiring because that could be a whole podcast that has nothing to do with advise or anything else about competitive announcements and how you get a government job and the KSAs or knowledge, skills, and abilities and all of those things. But the important piece, and I too, we had some great interns in New York. One of the interns that we had is now the special agent in charge of the Miami office, and he was my intern. Very proud of him to have climbed through those ranks, and a lot of the interns that we had did convert over because the pathways allows you to do that, and it really is part of that proving ground. And the thing that I think people miss sometimes in the government is that job titles aren't always what they purport to be, right? So you coming in as a clerk typist, that's a 1930s or 40s era position that implies that you sat like madmen waiting for Don Draper to come and give you your typing assignment on your Selectra typewriter. But it really was a way to bring people in. In New York, we brought people in through pathways, oftentimes at a GS4, which is a super entry level position or something like that. So the internship is a way to get your feet in the door, learn something. And I think what you're right about, Wade, is that oftentimes when people come from other agencies and they come over, a lot of times it is just a stopping point because they really hate where they are. They don't necessarily want to be at HHS OIG, but they certainly don't want to be where they are. So they use it as something. But I think you're right. People that come in and do their internship, maybe they develop a loyalty over time, or they find that they enjoy the cases or something like that. But the important thing on interns is you've got to think in terms of what are they going to do? And is an intern in your SIU or within your agency, are they going to do agent work or investigator work? And I think it's important to reflect to an intern that the things that you're having them do are things that you would be doing as an investigator. I would always tell interns, I don't need you to file paperwork for me. I don't need you to make photocopies. I could do those myself. That's not what you're here for. The purpose of an internship is to learn about the organization and the job, maybe with the prospect of there being something at the end of the day for you, but to get real life experience, to spend your day photocopying or filing doesn't give you anything that's actionable. I was the internship coordinator at OIG, and we had interns from Rutgers. And then I was a lecturer at Rutgers for those years because I would go every semester and do lectures on internships and careers in law enforcement and things of that sort. And the thing that I would always think was the most important was I would go around and ask some of the students about their internships. And it would boggle my mind how many of them were spending their days answering phones, photocopying, doing these mundane tasks that didn't give them any sort of actionable information that if they were sitting in an interview can speak saliently about any of these things. But Matt, I want to go to you because part of that challenge is there's a factor now that didn't exist a bunch of years ago, and it's called virtual. And we see that organizations plans particularly are reducing their physical footprints. The OIG is reducing its footprint left and right. My old office in New York, for example, which was one of the flagship regional offices in the country in Manhattan, is closing that office, and they're spreading people around, and they're moving to a different office, and they're doing a lot of remote related type things where people don't need to be in offices. In the SIU space, people don't need to be in the office. So interns are a great resource, both to help groom someone for a potential position, to give back to the community and do all those things. But it's a huge challenge. I mean, just trying to get 3 or 4 people to be available for a Teams or a Zoom meeting. Now think about the thing that you're trying to do with someone who's an intern, where it's really a hands-on approach.
Yeah, it is a different world now. I mean, Wade, you talked, eloquently about all the people you brought in and they became agents. You had similar things in New York. I had similar things in DC, where the OIG would go to American University every year. They'd have an internship open house, and it would be myself and someone from audit and someone from OEI, and we would go and interview these people, and then they'd come back for further interviews, and we'd pick them up. And then it was more like, in the morning, okay, who wants to take the intern out to go on an interview? Who needs help from the interview? And it was all in person, and they got very intimate, mentoring from everybody, because everybody was in the office, and would take them out into the field, and they got a great experience. I think that led to a lot of them wanting to join us and staying with us their whole careers. Now it's a little different. And I make it akin to even recruiting new people or training existing people. This virtual environment, you have to be much more structured in how you approach an internship. Someone comes in, a college student, they don't know anything about your organization. A lot easier to learn it if they're in the office every day and they see the comings and goings of people, and they see how what the interactions are. Virtually, you've got to set up an onboarding process that explains things to them, whether it's walking through an org chart for a couple of hours and explaining, who these people are and what they do and how they all advance the mission of your organization, and then introducing them to those people, whether it's one-on-one or in a group, so that they get to know them. And then you've got to spend a lot of time with those interns, making sure they understand their assignments and working with them. And it's all done, through Teams meetings or WebEx or whatever it may be. And the experience can be, as fruitful, but it's much more difficult for the hiring agency and for the intern to really get that feel for, do I want to do this? So it's really, both sides are making an investment. And now in the virtual reality, that investment on the hiring agency side probably has to be a little bit more to be able to figure out, do we want this person to continue? And do we want, and we really want to make this a beneficial experience for the intern? It takes a lot more effort.
So let me ask you then, that presents a challenge, right? Because now let's get to the kind of the meat and potatoes of what we love to talk about, which is ROI, resource allocation, and setting that framework of what that culture is going to be. The challenge is that if you've got an intern and that intern is in a remote world, which is what we're primarily living in, there's a resource allocation issue there, because now the Wade McFalls of the world, if it wasn't for the fact that we have an intern starting who could drive over to Wade's house to sit with him, to where he can get that kind of one-on-one coaching. But it's actually just by happenstance that happened. The intern doesn't actually live in the community. It just so happens that he's going to school there, and Wade happens to live in that community. But the big issue is when we get down to this resource allocation, the ROI, which is an intangible. If you've got an intern that works out and it looks like they may be somebody that would be a good cultural fit during that 3-month or 6-month job interview that Wade was talking about, there's an investment to be made where you're bringing someone in that's going to be a winner.
Yeah.
But that investment comes at a huge cost, because Wade is spending a huge amount of time, particularly if you have an intern that comes in who doesn't know a CPT code from a HCPCS code from an ICD-10 code, to sit and spend the time to teach them about what those are. And it's got, it's an intern, so it's high level, but then to pull up like a billing history and walk an intern, because that's really how you have to do it. You can't just give them an assignment. There has to be a large amount of education behind it so that they get it right. Because honestly, if you're going to give an intern a project and they do it so poorly that it's so much time being spent, you might as well have just done it yourself and have your intern make photocopies. And then at the end of their internship, they've learned nothing. They have a bad taste in their mouth about the organization, and they won't ever want to come and work for the organization. It doesn't matter who it is, but how do you deal with that? Because that becomes, from my perspective, I know when I was sitting in the office in New Jersey and I had interns, they sat in the office next to me, the cube next to me, across from me. And I would have them, when I did interviews, I would always say, come over here, make them sit with me. And then you'd have a half an hour of Q&A that would result from that. And so the time commitment is really, you're doing something and then you're explaining something. It's a double thing. Is it worth having an intern where that time commitment exists, or is it worth have it be someone else's problem and then wait until they've got some experience?
I think it's well worth it if you've done a good job of selecting the intern, the nominee, so that there's a good chance that, just from the meets and greets that you've done, that this guy or this woman is someone that we like personally. It's a normal human being. We think they have potential. And then you have to look at it again as an investment. Yes, you are investing time and resources into, bringing this person up to speed and training them and mentoring them. But think of the benefit at the end. Now you've got someone that, as Wade said, is committed, probably coming in at a lower salary as an entry-level employee that already has 3 to 6 months experience, knows the business, knows the ins and outs, knows the processes, can hit the ground running as a new employee. So the ROI then is, the return on investment is at that point where they're starting to bring in things, working cases to resolution at a very young age and a very minor salary that might make up for that, initial investment. And then hopefully then you've got someone that, is going to be with you for 20 years.
Right. And, in today's climate, if you're a college kid and you're getting ready to graduate, you've got to have something on that resume. I mean, if you look at today's world, my sister works in academia. She's a career placement advisor. And one of her favorite stories is the college kid who's in their last semester and they've got some liberal arts major, and they're coming to her in April and they're asking, what should I do with this degree? And they haven't thought forward about what they could do, should do, or would do with that degree. And, they're wondering, like, I'm in my last year and I got 6 weeks till graduation, and my degree is going to be in humanities or art, history, whatever it may be. I know. Not being a history major and an English guy. So, but that's a legitimate question that students will come with. And so if you have to think a little bit ahead of the curve about internships and the value of internships, that, what's on your resume and how does that work? And I think that if an organization is going to take the time to bring you in as an intern, it really needs to be for something other than photocopying things, making coffee, running errands. It has to be something that's tangible, because at the end of the day, you're doing a disservice to your organization, because no one's going to want to come work for you if you do that. But it's a real challenge, and I think a little bit of it becomes as a collateral responsibility for people to take on the internship coordinator. and and facilitate how you can educate and train those students. I loved it. It was an interesting thing for me. I enjoyed doing it. Clearly, the two of you enjoyed doing it as well. Wade's experience actually facilitated him wanting to do it more because, you know, he was one of those people. So I think that interns, you know, internships are something that, you know, we get asked a lot about internships here at Advise. We try to accommodate and do bring on interns, but for us, it's a little bit of a challenge just because of the way that we're structurally set up to be able to do that. But there is clearly a time commitment that's required. The biggest thing, honestly, has to be that the person that coordinates it and the people that serve in that internship manager or mentoring capacity have to be people that want to do it. It can't be a voluntold. If you're going to mentor a new investigator, a new agent, it's got to be by choice. If you're going to be someone who's monitoring or supervising or managing an intern, it has to be by choice. If you're voluntold to do it, it's just not going to be something that you know anybody wants to do. The other thing, which I think gets back to,
especially in a virtual environment, they are out of sight, out of mind.
right. And I think the last piece, which is the thing that we talked about, for example, with mentoring new investigators or new agents, is having this roadmap of what are their expectations and what are they looking to do. And we talked about this in mentoring new staff, are kind of that checklist of things. So Wade, I want to go to you for the last piece of this is, you know, from an internship perspective, and you're going to be spending a lot of time with our intern, what are some of the things that you kind of have in your head as to the things that you are going to be walking through with our intern, who's going to be spending his summer working in, you know, with the SIU team, fraud, waste, abuse, compliance? What are some of the highlights? If we were at a payer SIU versus the outsourced, I don't think it really changes, but what are some of the things you have in your mind in the next 2 months that our intern is going to be there? What do you see as being kind of the highlights of an intern in a healthcare fraud SIU?
Well, I think initially the the first few steps are, it's not the most exciting part, but there's got to be some like education, reading on what the program is. I mean, the first couple days, I think you get a good head start by just reading a lot of the program manuals, or just to try and get a good idea of what it is that the agency or the department, whatever it is, does. And then I think the other key thing is to give them a good, like, an overview, have them exposed to like as much of the job as you can. They probably can't do everything, but have them see what kind of reports you write, get them kind of exposed to, like you said, what is the CPT code versus a HCPCS code. I would think most people coming on as interns don't know any of that stuff. I know I didn't. But you know, different types of you know, billings, you know, different kind of records that you're going to review, look at the medical record requests that we send out, so they can get a overall view of kind of the high level of what the issues are and what has to be done to, you know, correct and work those issues. So a little piece of the pie from as many angles of the pie as you can get at, I think, is really important.
Yeah, so that's the great takeaway. Matt, go ahead.
As you say, you move them along the process. You show them what the data is, how to identify the suspect claims from the data after you've explained what a claim is and what these codes mean. And then you take it to the next step of, you know, how do you create a medical record request? What members do you want to interview? You know, have them come in on interviews as a witness to an interview, things like that. And you build them all the way toward a resolution of the case so that they see it from beginning to end and they get a good idea of what the process is.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is that one of the worst things that we can do is, and this is even when you hire a new person, is give them some documents and say, here, spend the next 3 days just reading those. I remember, you know, when I got hired as a brand new agent, that literally was what happened to me. I was put in a room and I was handed a case file from a person that I didn't have a lot of respect for, but I was given a case file and told to read the case file in its entirety, literally on day one. And
it was one of theirs. It was probably this thin.
It was not a very well thought out process. But so I spent the day reading a case file and walked away from it being more confused than anything else. Now, I knew a little bit about healthcare fraud because in my first life, I was a federal probation officer and I did pre-sentence investigations and I had a couple of healthcare cases. So I at least knew enough to get myself in trouble, but I certainly didn't understand the vernacular or any of that. So reading a case file was not really a very productive use of time or effort or energy. And so, giving someone that, putting them in a room and saying, here, read this, then come back with questions, you're going to have more questions than there were pieces of paper in the file. So you have to kind of think that out. And it may require a lot more time on Zoom or Teams or whatever your platform is, and then a lot of screen sharing to walk people through it and explain it to them. And but I think the biggest thing, which is your piece, Wade, is little pieces of the puzzle and not the whole puzzle. They're here for 3 months or 4 months. They're not going to find the puzzle. They're just going to find pieces of the puzzle. And it's really just about giving them some working knowledge. The closing point that I'll make is that when you're with an intern, you're spending a lot of time not only showing them what you want them to do, having them do it, but then having to go over it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that it was done the right way, right? Because that's kind of the key takeaway, and get them to understand what it is that they're doing. It's not just doing something for the purposes of doing it. Here's the goal of why we're doing it. So great food for thought. I think that it's a great thing for people. I think there are more people that want to share their knowledge and what they've learned over the years. From a personal perspective, I think it makes us all feel really good when we see people that we've mentored and people that we've, helped along the way be successful. I am the proudest to know that, one of the guys that I intern is now the SAC of Miami. I'm super proud to know that the guy that I mentored is the Deputy Inspector General for Investigations at OI. That makes me very, very proud to know that. I hope that I make Jason as proud as the guys that did it for me. So, and I'm sure you have people, Matt, you talk fondly about people that brought you up in the space as you do, Wade. So at the very minimum, from a selfish perspective, it helps to make you feel good about, what is otherwise sometimes a terrible day in some regards. So think about it. If your organization is considering bringing on interns, think about the value of those interns and the amount of time and the effort that it is, sometimes reaps non-tangible rewards that really give people a motivation and boost morale in some ways. So good stuff to talk about. We're always here to help with formulating that. We do it a lot with some of our clients. We help them with some of these side projects, just giving them sort of our best practices. So as always, we thank everybody for spending the time to take time out of their day to listen to and watch our podcast. Again, you can get the podcast is in our newsletter. We're now putting out a day earlier than the newsletter on LinkedIn, so you can get it that way. Check out our updated and refreshed website, advizehealth.com. We have a brand new website. You can sign up for the newsletter right through the website. You can always get in touch with us at hello@advizehealth.com. And then, of course, next week, we've got our LinkedIn Live on behavioral health. We're going to be talking about investigations, auditing, and coding in the behavioral health space. We've got two great people here on the Advise team. Renee Sloan, longtime investigator in behavioral health with a huge behavioral health background, and David Bolden, our lead project manager on our auditing and coding team, who has a very strong behavioral health auditing and coding background. So I'll be moderating a discussion with them on fraud, waste, and abuse and compliance in the behavioral health. So as always, we thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next OIG Roundtable.